So what led you to become a minister?
That question is such a hard one for two reasons. The idea of being led is, you might not be surprised in my work, every word matters, right? So that would be to put the responsibility somewhere else. I think it's fair to say I backed into this rather than being led to it. And I mean by that, I went to the university. Initially, I went to Wellesley College with no other purpose than to be a physician. My opening semester was absolutely shaped by my study of Russian because I would need to be able to converse with a Soviet scientist about the cancer I was going to cure. Needless to say, some things changed along the way. And the changes had to do with becoming enamored with history, particularly the history of art. And from my years at college, still thinking medical school was my destination. I was, by the time I finished college, married, and my husband was in grad school, so there was a need for me to wait until at least he was finished so he wouldn't starve. In that time period, more thinking, more emerging stuff, and history became something I was teaching. I began to find how often religion, I'd been raised in a tiny sectarian British community that my father's family established in 1820 in the Midlands in England. Looks theologically a lot like the Amish, a little bit like the Quakers, but definitely not mainstream anything. So I never saw clergy. The idea of a minister was not something I had any working knowledge of. The chaplain at Wellesley I met after I graduated. So these were not pictures in my head. I knew what rabbis were. I was raised in a predominantly Catholic area of Philadelphia, so I knew what priests were. They were nice people. I certainly didn't have any vision of being one. So backing into this process was a process of backing out of medicine, backing into human care through work with teachers and teaching and school kids and problems, and into history and into a really rich conversation about religion that kept coming up in my secondary school teaching. I had had enough of secondary school teaching. I was teaching a very busy, difficult school. I caught myself writing a little note for a journal one day that I was asked to write an article for that said professional is a word they use for you when they're not going to pay you for whatever it is you have to do. And I thought that indicated I was becoming cynical and I should take a break. While looking for a break, I looked at the Rockefeller Brothers Fellowship, which took me to Harvard Divinity School. And I actually stood for the first month I was there, halfway between the law school and the Div School, taking an interest in courses in both places, and then finally deciding I would drop the law school thing, at least temporarily, and head off to the Div School. And that's the path toward ministry. But if you'd asked me then, I still would have told you teaching. My ordination came later, and in some ways is an accident of our family heading to Hanover, New Hampshire, and my stumbling into a church that I thought was more than a curiosity.
What led me to become a rabbi? Well, I grew up in a home that was, in terms of the context of our community, in Wharton, Texas, a little town in southeast Texas. We went to synagogue every Friday night. We had Kiddush and Motzi and Shabbos dinner and went to shul. And in the context of that community, we were an observant family. I didn't know much beyond it, but I had a wonderful rabbi who'd come from Europe. He escaped the Holocaust. And I studied with him privately, and he was in our home a lot. We were in his home a lot. And I was very attracted, and I wanted to continue Jewish studies when I left home after high school. I'd been to Camp Ramah in California my 2 last years in high school, before my 2 last years in high school. And that intensified my desire to study more. So instead of going to the University of Texas, where I was all set, I applied to Yeshiva University and went there and studied for 4 years and got a very good Jewish education. And during that time, I decided I wanted to continue this as my life work and try to share my enjoyment with Jewish study to other people. So I went to JTS, which felt like a more comfortable home.
So what led you to become an imam?
Well, first I was enrolled in memorization of Quran. It was actually my grandfather's wish to see me, memorizing the whole Quran. So I was 11 years old when I completed the memorization of the entire Quran. It took me about 13 months. And then the institute where I completed my memorization of Quran, that had further Islamic studies intensive courses as well. So from that point, I said I want to join that as well. So I started learning that. I spent about 6 years there, and I learned a lot. I learned the basics, for example, the basics of Arabic grammar and the fundamentals of Islamic studies, principles of Islamic jurisprudence and Quran and Hadith. So these were the sciences that I learned at that time. And then I continued my education after getting Masters of Islamic Studies. At that time, I went for further specialization in Islamic jurisprudence. After I completed my Islamic jurisprudence specialization, which is called IFTA, or Takhassus fil IFTA, that was a point that I had to make a decision whether I should become an imam, or I should become a professor or a teacher of Islamic theology. So at that time, I made the decision that I will become an imam, and that's when I started this job in 2005.
What led you to become a priest?
Yes, people always want to know that. Probably my family background and the place of religion in the life of Catholics in the 1950s, you know, when I was growing up. The priest was a very visible person and seemed to be, I don't know how to describe it, but a person who was doing some good in people's lives. We had in my parish a priest of a religious order who was rather a diamond in the rough, not a man of a lot of book learning or sophistication, but who really was involved with the lives of all the people in Portsmouth before it became a big suburban refuge. It had been rather rural, and he knew everybody in town. He went to people's wakes if they were Catholics or Protestants, Jewish. He didn't care. He was the priest to everybody, and it was that kind of thing, I think, that probably inspired me to the priesthood. It's turned out rather different from what I thought it was when I was, 12 years old, but yes, and the world has changed too. It's not necessarily now a automatic step into a prestigious life, so.